Hey everyone, this is Hunter Williams with the Awana, Tennessee Network, and I've got a special episode for you today. I recently did a live online event called Youth Ministry in the Age of Change, and it was all about learning the characteristics of Gen Z and letting that inform us to better love, serve, and disciple them. And this is a recording of that event. I'm also going to include the handout and the slides of this event in the show notes. Now, the only thing that's not part of this recording is the live discussion we had at the end. But I want to let you know that if you have any questions or thoughts from this content, you can send me an email at hunterw@awana.org. Well, I hope you enjoy this recording and pray that it's an encouragement and that it equips you. This is Youth Ministry in the Age of Change. Just to let you know why I chose this topic, youth ministry is always going to have a special place in my heart because I was a youth pastor for a couple of years. I went to Moody Bible Institute in college, and right after Moody, I was a youth pastor for a couple of years and loved it, loved being able to serve the students, learned a lot during that time. Also, just been around youth ministry in several different ways. I've served at youth camps, been speaker, counselor at youth camps, served at youth events. And right now I have a lot of friends from Bible college and just friends in general here in Chattanooga who serve as youth pastors. So around it quite a bit, but I say all that not to say I'm an expert, because by no means am I an expert in this topic. Really, this topic just came out of some observations, but also just some research I found and been digging into. And so just wanted to share my thoughts, my observations, and let that inform us in how we disciple this current generation. So with all that said, let's dig in. So the way we're going to be working through our discussion, this content tonight, is by way of 4 questions. We're going to be asking, why are we serving? Who are we serving? How do we serve them? And what are some helpful resources to help us serve them? So that being our template, first we're going to be looking at why. Why do we do this? And our calling is to serve students. Now, I want to give a caution when we talk about our calling, because when we think of youth ministry, we can try and fill in the blank of what our calling looks like. You know, we might say, we're trying to fill these kids' time. You know, so many things are fighting for their time, and we want to fill their time so they're not going astray to some other things. And while that's good, while we do want to fill their time and maybe keep them away from things that could be a bad source of filling their time, that's a very small goal. And that is very minimal compared to what our true calling is. That's a part of it, but that's not our whole calling. Because everything's fighting for their time, like I said. And so it's got to be greater than that. Another caution I would give is our calling is much more than entertainment. You know, youth ministry is fun. That's what it's known for. It needs to be fun because we're engaging younger people. But that's not the end-all be-all of youth ministry. And that's not how we gauge success of youth ministry. You know, you think of youth ministry and you say, well, we want to be fun and entertaining so we can get them in the door. But then you've got to have a follow-up question to that, which is, yes, we want to get them in the door, but what are you doing once they're there, right? How are you filling that time once they're there? What's happening? And so to think through that, I wanted to read a quick quote. I don't know if you've read or heard of this book. It's Resilient. Awana put this out just a few months back. And at the intro of this book, the author, Valerie Bell, she writes a letter from the church to this generation in the future. And listen to what she says. It's so powerful and profound. She says, your future looks challenging. Warm, fuzzy memories may not be enough to strengthen you then. Will we, the church, regret that we filled the small amount of time we had with you with delightful things, spiritual entertainment, but things so inconsequential they didn't travel into your adult life except as lovely memories? I remember when I first read that, it was like a punch in the gut. Because it's true, you know, I feel like we can get so worried about, is this cool enough? Is this fun enough? Is this exciting enough? That yes, we're making these memories, but are we giving them something substantial enough to travel with them into adulthood so that they have that worldview, to have those strong Christian foundations? And so we see it's more than filling time, it's more than entertainment. But another end of the spectrum we can go to that's too far is it's more than just a transfer of information. It's more than just making sure they have the right knowledge. And here's why I say that. Because you can have the right knowledge, and the Bible talks about having the right knowledge, but just because you have the right knowledge doesn't mean you're wise. And just because you have the right knowledge doesn't mean you believe. And so we have to do more than just say, here's the right information, here's the right information, here's the right information. It has to go beyond that. We have to help them, as I said, have that worldview, have those conversations that lead to a change of desires, a change of allegiances. It has to be a holistic approach. So here's our calling. Our calling as believers, and I want you to underline that. If you have your handout, underline that word believers, because this calling I'm about to read to you, it's not just for pastors, it's not just for missionaries, it's not for just elite Christians. If you say yes to Jesus, you say yes to this mission and this calling right here. Our calling as believers is to make followers of Christ who belong to a community of faith, believe in the truth of the gospel, and become like Jesus in every aspect of life. And all three of those are key. And this is kind of the language Awana uses: belong, believe, become. And this helps bring that holistic approach we were talking about to our calling and making disciples. Because when we have them belong, when we have that Christian community, that helps you determine who you hang out with has a great influence on your attitude, your values, your characteristics, your thoughts, your beliefs. So having that Christian community is powerful. And then belief, making sure they're believing true things about the gospel. And then finally, become. See, we don't want to just give them good friends, good Christian community. We don't want to tell them the right things. We want to make sure that they're taking those right things and applying them to their life so that they can become like Jesus in every aspect of life. So that way they can apply it. So that's our calling when it comes to this generation. And I love this quote by Jonathan Morrow. He talks about having this long view in discipleship. Listen to what he says. If you can't mass produce transformation, helping our teenagers grow is a long-term endeavor. In addition to the work of God's Spirit and our response to His grace, this process takes time, intentionality, honest conversation, and mentors. The best thing we can do when discipling Generation Z or any generation thereafter is to take the long view. And I think this is so wise for Jonathan to share, because I think we can get in the trap in youth ministry of just looking for those short-term wins. Like I said, we can make the short-term wins like it being fun or filling time or giving right information. Those are short-term wins. Those are good things, but we got to have the long view in mind. And the long view is, like I said, where we're inviting them into a community that's helping them believe the right things, but becoming like Jesus in their life. And it's having that Christian worldview where they have that lens, where they see the gospel through in everything. Also, it's that way of changing their desires, their affections, having them love Jesus and the things that He loves. And then it's also about changing their allegiance. What do they stand for? What do they fight for? So we've got to have that long-term view, and having that long-term view, it helps us, because change in a student, and for anyone in that matter, comes little by little, inch by inch, conversation by conversation, faithful night by faithful night. So keep that long-term view as we seek to make disciples. So who are we serving? Well, who we're serving is Generation Z. And Generation Z is there's slight differences on this age range depending who you ask or what research you're looking at, but generally they would agree it's the mid 90s to around the 2010s. So a lot of research I've seen, Gen Z is kind of defined around 1996 to 2012 or something like that. So that's who we're looking at, and that's who is filling up our kids and youth ministries right now. So what is a generation? I found this definition helpful because it goes beyond defining a generation by just age. Listen to this quote I found. I believe it was on access.org. It said, a group of people born within a certain period of time, whose shared age and shared experiences shape a distinct world view. And I would underline that shared experiences part because I think that's really big. That's what defines a generation because it's this age group experiencing these similar things. And that gives you similar ways of looking at things, gives you values, it shapes your attitude, your characteristics. And so, really, that's what starts to form a generation. And if you look at all past generations, they had big events or milestones that really shaped who they were. So, with that said, I want us to look at those shared experiences. But before we do, I really want to make sure we understand why we study generations. Found this other helpful quote. It says, how you view this generation will shape the way you minister to them, how you preach to them, how you mentor them, how you counsel them, build relationships with them. It's human nature that the older we get, the more negatively we describe the current generation. And that's true. I mean, I can even think of times I've seen this current generation say, "Oh, I can't believe they do this or think this way." But here's a challenge I want to give you as we dive into some of the characteristics of Gen Z is when you study a generation or look at their habits or their characteristics, you can either let those things enrage you or you can let them inform you. Let me say that again. When you study or look at a generation, you can either let their characteristics enrage you or you can let their characteristics inform you how you can best love, serve, and care for them. So that's why I want to look into their characteristics, is that will inform us on the decisions and the actions we need to take when we serve Gen Z. So I've got some pictures up here to get us thinking through maybe some big events or shared experience Gen Z have. So if you want to, in the comments, in the chat, comment what comes to mind when you think of experiences that Gen Z has gone through. Now, remember, Gen Z is around the mid 90s to the early 2010s. So, what are some shared experiences? Like I said, I've given these pictures up here to give you a hint at some of the big things that have come along in their generation. As you're thinking, I'll go ahead and say some obvious ones that are on here, right? So on that bottom left, we see the cell phone, don't we? And the cell phone, when that came, smartphones specifically, when smartphones came, that was a game changer because now the world is in my pocket. I no longer just use my phone to make phone calls. I use my phone to send messages, to pay my bills, to get a GPS. I use my phone literally for everything now. That's completely changed how we relate to one another and how we see the world operate. The world now is in our pocket. We have news 24/7 in our pocket. There's some other obvious things that come out of that. You see there, I've got some icons for social media. And social media, again, that changed how we relate to one another. It changed the way we think about connection because now I can connect with anyone across the world with just a click of a button. Like right now, through media platforms, I'm talking with people from Texas, from Washington, from North Carolina. So technology, it's brought a lot of increase in the way we connect with people, but also that, again, that's shaping how this generation reacts and thinks to certain things. There's some other pictures here that may not be as obvious, but so for example, you see I got the man standing there with the gun. That represents global terrorism. Terrorism is a shared experience among Gen Z because you had the events of, 9/11's a little kind of toward the beginning of their time, but you've also got terrorist groups like ISIS and other things. So you got these idea of terrorism that can shape their characteristics. Some other things on here, you see that the flag in the middle, that represents the Supreme Court's ruling on gay marriage. And that's had a lot of change in how Gen Z thinks about the topics of sexuality, sexual identity, who we are. And so that has a big effect on how those conversations go in their worldview. We also see here the scale toward the bottom right, and that represents the political landscape. And I'll say this, the 2016 elections, that had a big effect on how we look at politics and how we talk about politics. You know, politics have always been kind of divisive, but Now, when you couple that with smartphones, social media, 24/7 news, all these things, it was just more and more, and it promoted tribalism and this culture of outrage, and it almost, there were these scandals and all these things, and so uh, the politics, that definitely is a shared experience that influences the way they look at their country, they look at different things. And then obviously we've got COVID-19 on the top right there. And that is a huge experience that we're all facing. But Gen Z, it hits them especially because they're young, but they're old enough to understand that this is a big deal and it's affecting how they live. And so all these things, now I didn't even mention everything. These are just ones that came to mind. All these things you got to think are shaping the way they respond, they talk, they think, their values, all of it. So these are the shared experiences we're working with. Now let's see the characteristics that flow out of those shared experiences. First of all, anxiety. If you do any Google search on Generation Z, this is going to be the top thing that comes up is anxiety, them being anxious. And man, I was floored by all the research I found on this. I'll give you just a couple of things I found. In a Harvard Business article, I saw that 75% of Gen Zers who leave their jobs, they leave due to mental health issues or stress. Now, interestingly, that may not mean that Gen Z has more mental health issues than previous generations. It just means they're more aware of it, or that they struggle with this concept of stress more. So just interesting to say that the 75% of the reason they left was due to stress or mental health reasons. Just some other things. I was looking at this psychological journal, and it said that, and I found this very interesting, that the highest stressor, one of the highest stressors for Gen Z is money. Gen Z is a very practical generation. They define adulthood differently than my generation did. So I'm millennial. They define adulthood differently than us. So if you were to look at the landscape of millennials, they'd say you reach adulthood when you have emotional stability. But Gen Z, they say you've reached adulthood when you have economical, financial security. And so you got to think with the economic crisis, with COVID going on right now, anxiety is just building up because they're thinking, man, my future, my stability, that's being squandered, right? And so I found that to be a really interesting find. Um, and then too, you just see, I guess, with the political landscape that's happened, Gen Z has a growing lack of trust in the government and just a less hopeful view of the future when it comes to our country. So that's interesting to see all these things playing out into their anxiety. Right behind that, the second biggest thing you're going to see talked about with Gen Z is that they're very, very lonely. Now, this is interesting because now we have more tools and resources at our disposal for connection. But what they're finding in the research is even though they have more ways of connecting, a lot of their connections are very thin, very shallow, and not a ton of them are in depth. And so that could play part of it. But really, what's playing into the loneliness when it comes to social media is because they can see all their friends all the time, because they see all these things, they have growing feelings of missing out, feeling left out, or feeling less than. Because think about it, you see your friend, they go on this great trip. Oh, I wish I could do that. Or, oh man, this person's hanging out with my friends. Man, I wish they would have invited me. And so that just grows, and you get this growing thing of anxiety and loneliness. Those go together a lot when it comes to social media's effects on Gen Z. But more than that, loneliness has come to Gen Z because more than any generation, Gen Z, the family unit, is not as strong as it used to be. About 50% of kids growing up right now are growing up in broken families. And 1/3 of those kids either don't know their father or their father's not in the picture. So you think about that. This is a generation of broken families, of fatherlessness. That plays into loneliness because used to, if you didn't have any friends, at least you had your family you could count on. But now a lot of these Gen Z, they say, mom's gone working a lot, dad's not around. So they're just struggling with loneliness from within the family unit and out. Next thing we see is tolerance. And this flows out of, like I said, different things that's happened in the Supreme Court. And then just in general with with having the world at your fingertips with your phone, you can see all kinds of worldviews, all kinds of information. And so this has led to Gen Z to be more accepting of others and of differing views. Gen Z, they're more likely than millennials to support same-sex marriage, transgender rights, and interracial marriage. And there's so much more that I could put here. But one thing I thought was interesting was when you come to the point of morality, this is how a lot of Gen Z defines morality. This third bullet point here, basically they say if it doesn't hurt someone, it's okay. If it doesn't hurt someone, it's okay. So if it doesn't hurt them physically or emotionally or whatever, or, it's fine. So that's a very different way of looking at morality than previous generations. So again, building into this tolerance and being very open to new ideas and different things. Next thing we see is a short attention span. Now, I found this very interesting. I was reading a Forbes article, and they were talking about, like digital marketing and advertisement, how when they were doing advertisement to millennials, they needed about 12 seconds to really get their attention, say what they had to say. Well, that shortened with Gen Z. Now Gen Z, 8 seconds. That's crazy. 8 seconds to really try and get your point across or to grab their attention, which makes sense because Gen Z, more than any other generation, they're in information overload. So your brain is constantly going, see this? Nope. See this? Nope. So there's all this screen juggling. They not only have phones, they have tablets, they have TVs, they have all this stuff that they're working through. So that's led to their brain just saying, we're not going to give our attention a lot to this because we got to give it to this, 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 and this. And so that's going to have to inform in the future, or even now, how we look at discipling Gen Z. And we'll get to that in practical steps later. And then the last thing I would say is Gen Z is becoming known as a post-Christian culture. But in doing some research, I found some good news in some of this. So let's bear with me here. It was interesting to see that when we say post-Christian, that doesn't necessarily mean that Gen Z, that they're anti-Christian. It just means that they're more willing to turn to other places besides Christianity and the church to try and connect with the spiritual realm. You go a few generations back, if you were struggling, if you needed spiritual guidance, the church was the first thing that came to mind. Now with Gen Z, they can just go online, Google spiritual help, and they get 1,000 different resources or 1,000 different influencers or people to look at. So they just have more options. Okay, so that's why it's post-Christian, because Christianity isn't the first thing, at least in the United States, that people think to when they think spiritual guidance. But here's why I say this could play into our favor a little bit. The second point, Gen Z has little to no awareness of the Christian faith, which means that they're more open to exploring it when presented with the opportunity. The reason I say that's a benefit is because it's almost a blank slate when it comes to Christianity, not entirely, but because they're a little more open and they don't have as much background knowledge, you can just give them the true straight up gospel. Because I noticed with my generation or previous generations, maybe they have a lot of misconceptions about Christianity or were taught things incorrectly. So you had to do a lot of unlearning before you taught the truth. Or with Gen Z, it's kind of just like, I don't know much about this, tell me. And so that presents a lot of great opportunity for us. And the fact that they are open to listen, that's really great too. So we can see that even though it's very different than previous generations, that could be a positive for us when we look to make disciples. So that's the characteristics. There's much more. I'm actually going to give a link to a resource at the end that gives more characteristics of Gen Z. Those are the top ones I wanted to look at, and then give some practical steps that bounce off of those. So with that said, we've seen why we serve, we've seen who we serve. Now let's look at how we serve them. So the first thing I would say is know their stories. Know their stories. And that might sound cliche or like, duh, you need to know your students. But I want you to listen to me here for a second. When I say know their stories, here's what I want you to keep in mind. Interaction with your students, interaction is greater than production. Connection is greater than perfection. And the reason I've worded this way is because I was reading different social marketing strategies that different businesses use. And what's interesting, when they were researching Gen Z would rather have something be presented to them that's authentic and honest rather than polished and perfect. That means that they would rather have something uh, be honest, but maybe not the best quality or have mess ups or screw ups. So if they saw the heart behind it, they saw it was really who that person was, they would go for that rather than high production quality and looking like you got it all put together. Um, they really do care about authenticity, maybe a little more than my generation did. And I think that's a big help for us because I think sometimes in youth ministry, we can get so worried about, oh, we've got to make what we do look cool. We've got to be fresh. We got to be relevant. This has got to look nice. And yeah, we want to do things with excellence. We want to do well, but honestly, don't get so lost in that you lose just the space to learn their stories, to get to know them, but also for them to get to know you and to know truly who you are and what you've gone through. There's this old saying, and it still holds true today: students don't care what you have to say until they know how much you care. And I've got so many stories I could share from youth ministry about that. But I had one that came to mind as I was putting this together. I had a youth retreat I did, and I was staying in the guys' cabin with all the guys, and a lot of them were kind of closed off, not wanting to share. We had a lot of new guys join us for this retreat, which was really exciting, but a lot of them were closed off. Well, we were getting toward the end of the week, and one of the guys, he said, "Hey, Hunter, can I talk with you about something?" So took some time, talked, and man, he opened up. After he saw I was willing to listen and share, wanted to care about his story, it came out. I mean, he was crying. He was sharing stuff I had no idea high schoolers went through. I mean, he was just opening up. So we talked a long time. I prayed with him, encouraged him, showed him scripture that talked to his situation. We went back to the cabin, and apparently he shared with the other guys like how I was willing to listen to his story without judging him. I listened first before responding because he had a lot. And well, because the other guys heard that, I was so open to caring about them and hearing their stories, one after another started coming to me saying, "Hey, can I talk with you like you talked with so and so?" Sure. And it just blew my mind. It was like taking a number of us. All these guys started coming up, wanting to have these one-on-one conversations, and that just showed me what they needed to see before we got deep with these spiritual issues. They just needed to see Hunter cares. He's not just going to come out the gate thumping us with the Bible. He's not going to come out the gate judging us for our stories. Because again, a lot of these guys were unchurched and they were afraid I would judge them for what they were going to say. And so just having that listening ear, caring about their stories and asking questions, that went a long way. So what I want to say to you, make space in your ministry to know their stories. Maybe you've got to make your small group time longer, or have a time where you have, those small group segments where guys can just share what's going on. It's a safe space uh, to share those things. So make time to know their stories. Next thing I'd say is ask questions, and that may sound like I'm saying the first thing over again, but this is a little different. Because when I say ask questions, what we need to start having in youth ministry is this posture of a humble leader. We need to be a humble learner when it comes to these students. This is a new generation going through new things. And I keep saying safe space. We need to let students know that we want to have good dialogue with them. And that's what these students need. They're in isolation a lot. They're behind screens. They're watching videos. What they need is just good conversation for them to think through, why do you like the things you like? Why do you do the things you do? And why do you love the things you love? And having those really good conversations with them goes a long way. So I've got a few examples down here, really asking their opinion on things and actually caring about what they say and listening before responding. Asking them if things about if the Christianity makes sense. Asking questions about culture. And here's some specifics on that. Maybe ask them what the top music is right now and say, "Hey, I don't understand this music, but tell me why people love this right now. What's the message it's giving? Why do they love this artist?" And you can do that with so many things. Like, what's the top show right now? Why do people like that show? Top movies, top heroes and icons in the culture. That will tell you so much about what a generation is seeking after by who their heroes and idols are. And ask, why do people love this person so much? Look at their hobbies, look at their talents, see what interests them. The more questions you ask and the more willing you are to listen before responding, man, you're opening that place again to know their stories, but it also opens doors to speak scripture into their specific situations. And again, it's more than just sharing knowledge, it's helping them see, how do I apply the truths of scripture to these specific issues and ideas? So having them share their favorite music, movies, shows, and say, now, what do you think the Bible would say to this? Well, do you think what you're watching is good, bad, unknown? So invite good dialogue. I would say talk with students before you ever talk at students, because it will go a very long way. Next tip I would give is keep it moving. Um, the reason I say keep it moving, remember, Gen Z has the shortest attention span of any generation to come, which makes sense because of what they're growing up in. But this needs to help us change not our content, not our message. The message of Christianity never changes. But we need to change our methods and modes of how we share this message. So we need to have it be bite-sized content. This is a YouTube generation. YouTube videos, you watch something really quick to learn something and boom, you're done. And if you notice, a lot of famous YouTubers, there's nothing high quality or special about it. It's something like this, where someone's just recording themselves in the room, sharing advice or ideas, and people eat it up. So make bite-sized content. And again, that doesn't mean you go less in depth, just go less in length. Think through how you can say what you need to say more simplistically, clearly, concisely. And that's a challenge for some of us to try and narrow those things down, but it helps. But also keeping it moving in the sense of changing segments, changing the medium you use, changing spaces. Again, Gen Z is used to juggling a lot of devices and doing a lot of things. They're the multitask generation. And so help moving things around is going to help keep their attention. Where some generations, keeping things moving a lot is distracting. For Gen Z, that's what keeps them engaged. So I'll give you some examples here. When I was a youth pastor, I try to keep things moving in multiple different ways. But not to the point where it's distracting. I'll mention a little bit more about that in a second. But keeping it moving, so I would have different segments to the night. And so Awana, that's kind of built into its structure. But if you're not an Awana person, Awana does a large group teaching time, a small group time, and an interactive game time, whatever you want to call that. But I also had just different segments within that. So when the students first walked in, we kind of had this little section we used to eat and catch up. We usually did cheap Little Caesars pizza, the cuisine of youth ministry, right? So we would have that time where we'd eat with the youth on the side, and then after that we'd move into time going to the gym where we play games. We would do goofy stuff, free time, whatever it was. Then we would move to the youth room where I'd give announcements and teach a lesson, and then we'd move to small group where we would discuss the lesson, where we would pray, where we would share our stories. And then after that, we would come back to the gym where kids could either leave or stay and hang out if they had more questions or just wanted to talk. So you see, we kept different segments. We had different spaces, but I also had different medium, the way I would share things. Sometimes I would play video. Sometimes I would share a song. Sometimes it would just be me talking. Sometimes I'd use an illustration. Sometimes I would do something through the Awana devotional handbooks that they give the students. I do different things, again, just to try and keep it fresh. And I didn't keep my messages long, but I made sure I kept them deep. I'm a theology major, so I don't skip on content, but I made sure I said it plainly, concisely, and it got to the point. And that leads kind of to what I want to say here is, yes, you want to keep it moving, but be intentional about how you're moving the night. You don't want your movements to be pointless, where you're moving from one place to another, but there's really no reason for it. I would say move, but move with purpose. Be intentional about why you change your segments, your media, your spaces. Be intentional with it. Don't just change just because. If you're going to change up the way you're teaching something, the space, the timing, really pray through it. Say, is this going to be the best thing that engages them? So keep that in focus. Sometimes we get stuck in a rut doing the same thing over and over, but sometimes maybe you just need to flip your night upside down where you do things in reverse order. I did that a couple of times where instead of the gym teaching small groups, we would do teaching small groups. I would flip it sometimes just because we had to get out of that rut to keep it fresh. But generally, I tried to be purposeful with how I move things. So remember, bite-sized culture. This is the YouTube generation. And then I would say make it real. And what I mean by that is, again, we're not just giving them information. This is the information overload generation. They're constantly bombarded with information. What we need to show them is not only is the Bible true, but it can apply to every avenue of your life. Listen to this quote here I found. It says, Christianity is not just a faith we believe Wednesday night at Bible study and Sunday at church. It is a worldview that shapes how we think about everything. I think one of the reasons why the church has lost its power is we live a compartmentalized faith. And that is so true. That's so convicting too. Because how many of us, not just Gen Z, but how many of us, we can be really engaged and really have a biblical thought pattern and worldview when we're at church, but maybe we act differently or think differently when we're at our jobs, or when we're at home, or when we're at the grocery store, or when we're at the sporting games, or whatever it is. And this is showing us we have to show Gen Z, your faith is not just something at church. It's something that should influence every aspect of your life that you carry with you everywhere. And so we need to make it real. And just some tips I would say for that is, one way to make it real is to make the lesson real for you first. Sure, we're teaching to middle school and high schoolers, but that gospel truth, that applies to us, whether we're teaching it to students or ourselves. So maybe as you're teaching the lesson, you can say, hey, this really convicted me this week. And the examples you can give of how to apply that lesson to your life, you can either talk of times you've applied it well, or share times where you didn't apply it well. I did that a lot, and I noticed students really gravitated toward that because it showed people, wow, he's authentic, he's being serious. I would share times where I screwed up, where I didn't apply the Bible well. And they really grabbed to that. So I would encourage you, share your own stories and share specifically how you would apply that message to your life. Say, oh man, with this lesson, I would do this at work, or with this lesson, this is how I change how I do things at home. Or the more specific you can get with the application, the more that they can think through how they can specifically apply the lesson. Another tip I give for this is, our generation is so used to running, going. They don't have time to just sit still and think through, how do I do this? So maybe in your small groups, before you get to a time of discussion, give them maybe 3 to 5 minutes of just silence, or maybe they have a pen and paper and you say, hey, write down how you would apply what you just heard taught to your life tomorrow. Give them 3 to 5 minutes to process it before you discuss. Because some kids, they're in such busy lives, they don't just sit and process things, and they need that. That's why we need good discussions. We need those times to just think. So try to make this as applicable as possible. Really get them to share. Don't just fill in the blanks for them. Really get them to share, how does this truth change your life tomorrow? Make it real. And then my last bit of advice I would give you when serving this generation is stay connected. Stay connected. Because, like I said, with Gen Z being connected to so many things, seeing so much information, them coming to church once or twice a week is a very small amount of their time compared to all this other stuff they're doing and all this other information they're getting. So we need to stay connected with them. So maybe you have them come to youth group on Wednesday night, but maybe before that next Wednesday night, find a way to personally connect with all those students. Have the small group leaders personally connect with them, or you find a few to personally connect with. Whether that's texting them, calling them, messaging them, maybe that's driving by and saying hello. Or it's this too, when we get past some of this COVID stuff, really taking an interest to attend and be a part of their sports, hobbies, or events. Man, I tell you what, I broke more ground in my youth ministry doing that than anything I did. So for example, my youth group was a hodgepodge. I had a lot of students in band. So I made sure, because I had so many students in band, I made it a priority to go to every band concert they had. Because man, it gave me something to talk about with them. It gave a connection. They'd say, hey, my youth pastor came to see me. I have students who played softball, so I went to softball games. Students who did plays, so I went and watched high school plays. I had some students who couldn't play sports, but loved talking sports. So I talked sports with them, even if I didn't know what they were talking about, And so just taking an interest in what they like, because again, they don't care what you have to say until they know how much you care. So stay connected in a lot of different ways. Listen to this quote that I found. I believe this is Jonathan Morrow again. He says, the vast majority of unchurched and de-churched people would not turn to the church, even if faced with difficult personal circumstances or in the event of national tragedies. It is not a question of improving the product of church meetings and evangelistic events. It means reaching people apart from meetings and events. Again, that just echoes what we were just talking about. Yes, we have those meetings at church, but because there's so much going on in their lives, we need to have those connection points beyond youth group to show them, hey, I care for you more than just the hour and a half that you're here. I care for you more than just the time I taught that lesson. I truly care about you in your life. Now, a side note for staying connected, if you do message students personally, text them, call them, make sure you have some kind of policy in place for that, making parents aware of that. I would say generally, try to do group messages. Obviously, guys messaging guys, girls messaging girls, but have some kind of policy in place where parents know, hey, just so you know, if you're a small group leader, hey, just so you know, at least once a week, I'm just going to try and reach out to see how they're doing. And usually when you tell parents up front, they see that as a good thing. Like, oh man, there's another loving, caring adult that wants to be a part of my son or daughter's life, that cares for them, wants to show them, teach them Jesus. That's great. Where if you don't have a policy and so there's personal messages going, the parent can go, wait, why are you messaging my son or daughter? So I would just say have some kind of written policy in place to when you do have those personal connections. But other than that, I'll tell you, texting, messaging, that can go a long way. Just texting, hey, how are you doing today? Or giving them an encouraging thought, or just asking, how'd that test go? I know you had a test today. Or, hey, how's sports going during this time? So staying connecting, huge benefits, really does go a long way. Well, those are some of my practical steps. Now let's talk about resources. What are some helpful resources as we look to serve? Obviously, being with Awana, I would definitely recommend Awana Youth Ministries. And I recommend that on a few fronts. One, Awana is going to have great content. If you don't use Awana Youth Ministries, I mean, their curriculum, it covers things like what do Christians need to believe, core doctrines, or apologetics, how to defend your faith. Why do we believe the Bible is true? Who is God? Why do we believe in God? It gives different tips on evangelism and witnessing. It does all these different things. Not only is the curriculum good, but it's got leader guides, it's got small group discussion guides, it's got parent guides that you can give to parents to take discipleship at home. So many great resources around Awana Youth Ministries. If you don't use Awana, would love to share more about that with you. Joel, who's been on our call with us, he week in and week out, he is a Awana High School director in Awana. It's called Journey. He's a Journey director, and I guarantee you could tell stories of how Awana has impacted his students. But yeah, definitely would recommend Awana Youth Ministries. Another resource I would recommend is youthleadercollective.com. Now, Youth Leader Collective, the director of this ministry is a really good friend of mine. I actually did a podcast with him on the Awana Tennessee Network podcast just a week ago. And he shared about his ministry if you want to learn more about it there. But Zach Wyatt and the team at Youth Leader Collective, their heartbeat is to empower youth leaders to be a catalyst in helping the church flourish and bringing the greatness of God to the next generation. And they do that through coaching. And one beautiful thing on their website, their resource tab is phenomenal. They have a huge list of books you can read. They have a lot of blogs, articles, podcasts, a lot of great stuff that can help you learn about Gen Z and how to do youth ministry well. So definitely check out youthleadercollective.com. Next thing I would say, these are specific. You'll find these on youthleadercollective.com. But the reason I mentioned these two resources specifically, I looked at these a lot when I was putting this presentation together. And great stuff on access.org. They have a whole section just on Gen Z. And what I love about them is they have guides on specific topics. So they have stuff on, Gen Z guide for depression, Gen Z guide for media, Gen Z guide, and the list goes on. They have so many. And so if you want to dive deeper into what we've talked about tonight, access.org is great. Josh McDowell Ministries, he covers a lot of stuff, but he does have a section on his website on Gen Z. And I actually used some of his stuff on the characteristics. So I named 5. He's got a list of about 10 or 15. He goes a little deeper into their characteristics. So the link I gave goes specifically to that section on Gen Z. So it's his website /resources/apologetics/research. So be sure to check those 2 out if you want to go deeper. And one I don't have on here, but I'll have Joel share in the chat, and he's been sharing a few of these links with you. My friend Zach Wyatt from the Youth Leader Collective, I asked him just for resources he'd recommend. And he just gave me this Word or this Google Doc that had a handful. And he put one book on there that I love. It's called Faith for Exiles. Phenomenal book. One of the best books you can read on this topic. And he gives some other articles and things. So I think the link to that Google Doc will be in the chat as well. But highly recommend looking at that too. So those are a lot of different resources. You could spend a long time looking at those. But now I just want to...
I hope you enjoyed this training. If you'd like to learn more about our ministry, or if you'd like to access more resources like blogs, articles, podcasts, videos, you can head over to our website at www.awanatn.com. Now, before I let you go, I do want to give a shout out to Joel Eastling. He served behind the scenes as a moderator and technician for this training. So I just wanted to say thank you so much, Joel, for making this work and for keeping things running smoothly. Well, that's all I've got for you. I'll see you next time. Take care.